The dragons had ruled the galaxy for longer than most species could count. They were massive creatures, each one the size of a small starship, with scales that shimmered like metal in the light of distant stars. They lived in the void between worlds, feeding on the energy of suns, and they feared nothing. Why would they? For 10 million years, they had been the apex predators of space itself. Every species in the Galactic Assembly knew the rules. When dragons appeared in your system, you gave them what they wanted. Tribute, resources, sometimes entire planets. If you were lucky, they would leave without killing anyone. If you were unlucky, they would reduce your colonies to ash just for entertainment. The Assembly kept careful records of dragon territories and made sure their member species stayed far away from those regions. No one fought dragons. Fighting dragons was death. The human colony ship Prometheus was 3 months into its journey when the sensors detected something approaching. Captain Maria Santa studied the readings with growing concern. 3 massive objects were moving toward them at incredible speed, and they were alive. The xenobiology team confirmed it within minutes. Dragons. 3 of them. Maria had read the briefings. Earth had only made contact with the Galactic Assembly 2 years ago, and the warnings about dragons were clear. Avoid them at all costs. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Surrender if necessary. She looked at the faces of her crew, then thought about the 8,000 colonists sleeping in cryopods below, families, children, people who trusted her to get them safely to their new home. The dragons made contact. The voice that came through the communication system was ancient and cold, speaking in a language the ship's computer struggled to translate. The message was simple. Surrender the ship. The humans would be taken as slaves. The ship itself would be consumed. Maria looked at her first officer. Open a channel to Earth. Full data stream. I want them to see everything that happens here. She turned to her weapons officer. Arm all missiles. Target the lead dragon. The weapons officer stared at her. Captain, our weapons can't hurt them. The briefing said, I know what the briefing said, Maria interrupted. But I'm not handing over 8,000 people to be slaves. If we're going to die, we die fighting. Maybe Earth can learn something from this. The crew moved into action. The Prometheus was a colony ship, not a warship, but humans had never sent vessels into deep space completely unarmed. The ship had defensive missiles, point defense guns, and 1 nuclear warhead that was technically meant for asteroid deflection. When the dragons realized the humans were arming weapons, they seemed genuinely surprised. The lead dragon moved closer, perhaps thinking the humans didn't understand their situation. Perhaps thinking they needed a demonstration of power. Maria gave the order. Fire everything. Missiles streaked across the void. The dragons moved with shocking speed, their massive bodies twisting and dodging. Most of the missiles missed or were destroyed by bursts of flame from the dragons' mouths. 2 missiles struck the lead dragon's scales and detonated. The explosions washed over the creature's body, but seemed to do no damage at all. The dragon's scales didn't even crack. The nuclear warhead was last. It detonated close enough to one of the smaller dragons that the creature was engulfed in the fireball. When the light faded, the dragon was still there. Its scales were blackened, and it looked angry, but it was alive. The dragons attacked. They moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. Fire poured from their mouths, superheated plasma that melted through the Prometheus's hull like it was paper. The ship's shields lasted seconds. The armor lasted seconds more. Maria watched her crew die at their stations, refused to run from the bridge, and kept the data stream to Earth active until the very end. The transmission cut off as the Prometheus broke apart. The dragons tore through the wreckage, looking for survivors to claim as slaves. They found none. Every human had died fighting or had been killed in the initial attack. The dragons consumed the ship's reactor for its energy and moved on, already forgetting about the brief encounter. It was just another hunt. Just another species that learned too late that you cannot fight dragons. But the dragons had made a mistake. They had let the humans transmit everything. Every second of the battle had been recorded and sent back to Earth in real time. The Galactic Assembly had tried to warn humanity about dragons, but warnings were abstract. Now Earth had something concrete. They had video of their people being slaughtered. They had data on dragon movements, dragon tactics, dragon weapons, and they had 8,000 reasons to be angry. The news reached Earth 3 days later because of the speed of their quantum communication network. The images were broadcast on every network, shown in every city. The world watched the Prometheus die. They watched Captain Santos refuse to surrender. They watched the dragons tear through human defenses like they were nothing. The response was immediate. Every nation on Earth, which had been arguing about colony rights and resource allocation just days before, suddenly had a single unified purpose. The world's leaders met in emergency session. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was going to war. The Galactic Assembly sent diplomats to Earth, trying to explain that war with dragons was impossible. They brought historical records showing dozens of species that had tried to fight back. Every single one had been destroyed. The Assembly representatives spoke with human leaders, pleading with them to see reason. The human ambassador listened politely to everything they had to say. When they finished, she smiled coldly. "Thank you for the warnings. We'll take them under advisement. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." The representatives left Earth confused and worried. They reported back to the Assembly that humans didn't seem to understand the danger they were in, that humanity was going to get itself killed. They were wrong. Humanity understood perfectly. They simply didn't care about the danger. Someone had killed their children. And humans had a very specific response to the thought. The Galactic Assembly had existed for 300,000 years. In that time, they had seen species rise and fall, empires expand and collapse, and countless civilizations learn the hard way that some fights cannot be won. The dragons were one of those fights. Every species eventually learned to coexist with them through tribute and careful avoidance. It was simply how the galaxy worked. Humanity didn't get the message. 6 months after the Prometheus incident, Assembly observers stationed near human space started sending confused reports. Earth's entire industrial complex had changed overnight. Factories that had been producing consumer goods were now making weapons. Shipyards that had been building colony vessels were now constructing warships. The humans were mining their asteroid belt at a frantic pace, stripping resources faster than the observers had thought possible. Ambassador Kelth, a tall insectoid being who had lived for 3 centuries, requested a meeting with Earth's government. He was granted an audience with the Secretary General, a stern woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who had been elected specifically to coordinate the war effort. "Secretary General," Kelth began, his translator device rendering his clicks and chirps into perfect English. "The Assembly is concerned. We understand you are angry about the loss of the Prometheus, but you must understand that fighting dragons is suicide." "Yes, you've mentioned that," Patricia interrupted. "Several times, in fact. Then why are you building weapons? Why are you preparing for war?" Patricia looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Ambassador Kelth, let me ask you a question. In your 300 years of life, have you ever had children? My species lays eggs. I have contributed genetic material to 17 hatching cycles. And if someone killed those hatchlings, what would you do?" Kelth's mandibles clicked in thought. "I would mourn. I would be angry. But if the killer was something I could not defeat, I would have to accept it and move forward." "That's where we differ," Patricia said quietly. Humans don't accept it. We don't move forward. When someone hurts our children, we make them pay, no matter the cost. Even if it means your extinction? Even then, the conversation ended shortly after. Kelf reported back to the assembly that humanity was committed to a suicidal course of action. The assembly debated whether to intervene, but ultimately decided they couldn't save a species that was determined to destroy itself. They would mourn humanity and learn from their example of what not to do. 3 months later, dragons raided the human colony on Arcturus Prime. A small pack of 4 dragons descended on the settlement, expecting the usual response: terror, chaos, and easy pickings. Instead, they found prepared defenses. The colony had been reinforced with weapons platforms hidden in the surrounding asteroid field. When the dragons approached, the platforms opened fire. The weapons were crude by galactic standards, but effective in their simplicity. Railguns fired solid tungsten projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. The dragons dodged most of them, but the sheer volume of fire meant some got through. One dragon took a direct hit to its wing and roared in pain and surprise. It was the first time in living memory that dragons had been injured in a raid. The dragons retreated momentarily, regrouped, and attacked with more caution. They destroyed the platforms one by one, but it took time and effort. When they finally reached the colony itself, they found it had been evacuated. The humans had left nothing behind but automated defenses and one final surprise dot as the dragons moved through the empty settlement. Demolition charges placed throughout the colony's infrastructure detonated simultaneously. The explosion was large enough to injure 2 of the dragons seriously. They fled the system, confused and angry. The raid had cost them more than any raid in millennia, and they had gained nothing. News of the encounter spread through dragon territories. It was treated as an anomaly, a fluke. Humans had gotten lucky, but then it happened again and again. Every time dragons attacked human colonies, they faced increasingly sophisticated defenses. Humans were learning, adapting, improving their tactics with each engagement. The real shock came at New Johannesburg. The colony was in an exposed position, easy prey for dragons. A pack of 7 dragons, a large hunting party by any standard, decided to make an example of it. They would show humanity what happened when you fought back. The humans were waiting. Not with simple defenses this time, but with a coordinated military response. Thousands of small autonomous drones swarmed out from hidden launch bays scattered across the colony and surrounding moons. Each drone was barely larger than a human fist, too small for dragons to worry about individually. But there were thousands of them, and they were programmed with one purpose: attach to dragon scales and detonate. The drones used the dragon's own speed against them, calculating intercept courses and swarming in waves. Dragons tried to burn them away with flame, but for every 10 destroyed, 20 more got through. The drones alone wouldn't have been enough. But while the dragons were distracted, orbital platforms that had been disguised as mining facilities opened fire with heavy railguns. And when the dragons tried to gain altitude to escape, human fighters dropped out of high orbit, moving at speeds that pushed their pilots to the edge of consciousness. The pilots were volunteers, and they knew the mission was likely one way. Their fighters were fast and maneuverable, but lightly armored. Dragon fire could destroy them with a single hit. But the pilots didn't care. They had all lost someone in previous dragon raids. They dove into the formations, firing missiles at point-blank range, using their ships as weapons when they ran out of ammunition. 3 dragons died in the first 15 minutes of combat. 2 more were critically injured and fell toward the planet's surface, unable to maintain flight. The remaining 2 tried to flee the system, but human ships pursued them relentlessly. It took hours, but eventually, both were destroyed far from any inhabited worlds. 7 dragons had entered the system. None left alive. The cost to humanity was 42,000 deaths, mostly civilians killed in the initial dragon attack before the military response could engage. It was a terrible price, but humanity had proven something the galaxy thought impossible. Dragons could be killed. And once humans knew something could be killed, they became very, very good at killing it. The Galactic Assembly called an emergency session. For the first time in 300,000 years, the topic was dragons. And for the first time ever, the discussion was about dragon casualties. Ambassador Kelth watched the footage from New Johannesburg a dozen times, and each viewing left him more disturbed. The tactics were brutal. The human fighters, in particular, haunted him. He watched pilots deliberately crash their ships into dragons when their weapons ran dry. He watched humans sacrifice themselves without hesitation, buying seconds for their weapons platforms to achieve target lock. It was horrifying and effective in equal measure. They fight like they have nothing to lose, another ambassador observed. No, Kelth corrected quietly. They fight like they've already lost everything and are simply collecting payment. The dragons, for their part, were no longer amused. The dragon elders, ancient beings who measured their ages in millions of years, had their first serious discussion about humanity. They reviewed the encounters, studied human tactics, and came to a concerning conclusion. Humans were learning faster than they could adapt. Every engagement provided humans with more data, more experience, and more motivation. The dragon elders made a decision. They would attack Earth itself with overwhelming force. 15 dragons would make the journey, the largest concentration of their kind in recorded history. They would burn humanity's home world and end this irritating species once and for all. It took them 3 months to gather the force and cross the distance to Earth's system. They emerged from faster-than-light travel at the system's edge and began their approach, confident and ready. They expected orbital defenses, expected desperate ships trying to stop them, expected terror from the humans below. They got all of that, but they also got surprises. The first surprise came when Earth's moon opened fire. Humanity had spent the past year hollowing out sections of their satellite and converting it into the largest weapons platform ever constructed. Magnetic accelerators, each 1 kilometer long, began firing projectiles at relativistic speeds. The dragons scattered, but in space there was no cover, no way to hide. 2 dragons died before they understood what was happening. Their bodies torn apart by impacts that released energy equivalent to nuclear weapons. The remaining 13 pressed forward, flames erupting from their mouths, attempting to destroy the lunar installations. The second surprise came from the asteroid belt. What the dragons had assumed were mining operations were actually thousands of ships, each one packed with explosives and guided by simple but determined AI systems. They began suicide runs, accelerating toward the dragons at maximum speed. The dragons destroyed most of them, but the sheer numbers meant dozens got through. Explosions blossomed across the battlefield. The third surprise came from Earth itself. Humanity had spent months studying dragon flight patterns and had developed a theory. Dragons use the magnetic fields around planets to help maneuver. So humans modified their own planet's magnetic field using massive generators installed at both poles. The field fluctuations disrupted dragon flight, making their movements sluggish and unpredictable. The battle raged for hours. 6 more dragons died in the chaos, their bodies left floating in the void. But 5 dragons managed to break through the defenses and began their descent toward Earth's atmosphere. They would burn the surface and end this once and for all. They entered the atmosphere and immediately knew something was wrong. The air itself seemed to fight them. Unknown to the dragons, human scientists had released carefully calculated chemical compounds into the upper atmosphere. The compounds reacted with dragon fire, producing thick smoke that choked their flames and made Breathing difficult even for creatures that could survive in vacuum. Ground-based weapons opened fire. Missiles, lasers, railguns, everything humanity could bring to bear. The dragons were powerful, but they were also tired, injured, and struggling to breathe. One by one, they fell. The last dragon crashed into the Pacific Ocean, and human ships were there within minutes to ensure it wouldn't rise again. 15 dragons had come to destroy Earth. None survived, but the 5 dragons that had fled when the battle started were still alive, scattered across the galaxy. Humanity's military command made a decision that would define their species for generations to come. They would hunt down every single one, not for strategic reasons, not for resources, but to send a message that would echo across the stars. For millions of years, you do not touch what humans love. The hunt took 3 years. Human ships, crewed by volunteers who understood they might never return home, pursued the fleeing dragons across light years. They tracked them through debris fields, followed the trace radioactive elements that dragon bodies naturally produced, hunted them through nebulae and around neutron stars. Captain James Rodriguez commanded one of these hunting ships. His younger sister had been among the colonists on the Prometheus. He had volunteered for the mission the day it was announced, and his crew was entirely composed of people with similar stories. They all had lost someone. They found their target near a red dwarf star, a young dragon that had fled the battle at Earth and had been running ever since. The dragon was exhausted, having spent years jumping from system to system, never staying long enough to rest properly. When Rodriguez's ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the dragon was waiting. It opened a communication channel, something dragons rarely did. "Please," the dragon said. Its voice transmitted through radio waves. "I mean you no harm. I will leave your space. I will never return. Just let me go." Rodriguez was silent for a long moment. His crew watched him, waiting. Finally, he opened a response channel. "My sister's name was Maria. She was 23 years old. She was going to be a teacher on the new colony. She had her whole life ahead of her." He paused. "You should have learned this 10 million years ago. Never touch what humans love." The ship's weapons fired. The dragon tried to flee, but was too tired, too slow. It took 15 minutes for the creature to die, and Rodriguez made sure his crew recorded everything. The footage would be sent back to Earth, then distributed across the galaxy. The message was clear. Humanity would find you. Humanity would never stop. And humanity would make you pay. The last of the fleeing dragons died 18 months after the one Rodriguez's crew had killed. The hunt was over. Humanity had lost ships, had sacrificed thousands of lives in the pursuit, but they had achieved their goal. Every dragon that had participated in the attack on Earth was dead. The galaxy watched in silence. The Galactic Assembly didn't know how to respond. This kind of sustained military campaign was unprecedented. Most species fought when necessary, but humanity had pursued individual enemies across the entire galaxy purely for revenge. It was terrifying. It was also undeniably effective. The Dragon Elders convened for only the 3rd time in recorded history. They met in the dead space between galaxies, where no one could observe or interrupt them. There were fewer elders now than there had been in millions of years. 8 of their kind had died in the war with humanity. They reviewed everything: battle footage, tactical analysis, psychological profiles of humans. They studied human history, learning about the wars humans had fought among themselves, the way they had climbed from primitive tools to space travel in just a few thousand years. They read human literature, watched human entertainment, tried to understand what made this species so different. The oldest of the elders, a massive creature that had lived for 15 million years, finally spoke. "They are more like us than we realized. They are apex predators, just as we are. But they evolved differently. Another elder responded, "How so?" "They are weak individually. Their weapons are crude. Their lifespans are nothing compared to ours." "That's precisely the point," the Ancient One said. "We became apex predators in space. We learned to survive alone, to dominate individually. They became apex predators on a world filled with other apex predators. They learned to work together, to build tools, to plan generations ahead. We are strong individuals. They are a strong collective." The elders discussed this for days. They reviewed the footage from New Johannesburg again, watching the human pilots sacrifice themselves without hesitation. They watched the coordinated defense of Earth, thousands of ships and platforms working together with perfect timing. They realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. Dragons had stopped evolving millions of years ago. They had reached the apex and had no reason to change. Humans were still evolving, still adapting, still improving. Every battle made them stronger. Every loss made them more determined. The dragons were facing an enemy that learned from defeat. While they had forgotten how to learn at all, the decision was made. The dragon elders composed a message and transmitted it to both humanity and the Galactic Assembly. It was the first formal communication dragons had ever sent to another species. The message was simple. The dragons acknowledged that humanity had defeated them. They offered restitution for the lives lost, payment in resources and knowledge. They established territories they would never enter, including all of human space and the space surrounding it. And they requested peace. It was a treaty. Dragons had never signed a treaty before. They had never needed to. Ambassador Kelth was present when the human delegation reviewed the dragon offer. He watched Patricia Okonkwo read through the terms with her advisors, discussing each point carefully. Finally, she looked up at Kelth. "What does the Assembly think of this?" she asked. "The Assembly is shocked," Kelth admitted. "In 300,000 years, dragons have never sued for peace with anyone. This is unprecedented. Do you think they mean it? Or is this a trick?" Kelth clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "Dragons are many things, but they are not deceptive. If they offer peace, they mean it. They're terrified of you." Patricia nodded slowly. "We'll accept their terms with one addition. We want a seat on the Assembly's Security Council." The room went silent. Kelth stared at her. "That's Secretary General. Humanity has only been part of the Assembly for 3 years. Council seats are typically reserved for species that have been members for millennia." "Things change," Patricia said simply. "Dragons used to be unkillable, and now they're sending peace treaties. We've proven we can defend ourselves and others. The galaxy needs to understand that there's a new power, and we're not going to hide in the shadows." Kelth reported back to the Assembly. The debate lasted for weeks. Some species were horrified at the idea of giving humans more power. Others pointed out that humans had accomplished in 3 years what the Assembly couldn't do in 300,000 years. They had made dragons negotiate. The vote was close, but it passed. Humanity was granted a seat on the Security Council, and their first order of business was drafting new protective legislation. Species under Assembly protection would no longer be required to pay tribute to dragons. Dragons would face consequences for unprovoked attacks. The age of dragon dominance was over. Decades passed. Human ships became a common sight throughout the galaxy, and human merchants, explorers, and diplomats spread across known space. The dragons kept to their territories and kept their word. Occasionally, young dragons would test the boundaries, and human patrol ships would drive them back. The encounters were brief and professional. Everyone had learned the lessons of the war. A human xenanthropologist named Sarah Chen requested an interview with one of the dragon elders for her research on the conflict. To her surprise, the request was granted. She traveled to the edge of dragon territory and met with an ancient dragon that had lived for 12 million years. "Why did you really surrender?" Sarah asked, recording the conversation. "You could have kept fighting. Your species is nearly immortal. You could have waited us out." The dragon was silent for a long time, its massive body floating in space, backlit by a distant star. Finally, it answered, "Because you reminded us of something we had forgotten. In our millions of years, we became the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. We had no rivals, no threats, nothing to fear. We grew comfortable, and?" Sarah prompted. "And then you arrived. You showed us that somewhere in the universe, there's always something more dangerous than you. Something hungrier, something more determined, something willing to sacrifice more than you thought possible." The dragon's eyes, each one the size of Sarah's ship, fixed on her. "But worse than that, you made us irrelevant. The galaxy feared us for 10 million years. Now they barely think about us. When young species ask about threats in space, their elders tell them about humans, not dragons." Sarah considered this. "Is that why there's a saying among the younger assembly species? Before humans, we feared dragons. After humans, dragons check under their beds." The dragon made a sound that Sarah's translator interpreted as laughter. "Yes, and it's true. We do check now, because we learned the most important lesson in the universe. There's always a bigger predator. We're just grateful that the bigger predator decided to let us live." The interview ended shortly after. Sarah returned to human space and published her findings. The paper became one of the most widely read documents in assembly history. Humanity continued to grow, to explore, to build. They made allies and friends across the galaxy. They shared their technology, their art, their culture. But they also built weapons, maintained their military, and never forgot the lesson of the Prometheus dot in the cold equations of galactic power. A new balance had been established. Dragons were still powerful, still dangerous, still nearly immortal. But they had learned fear. And in learning fear, they had learned wisdom. The galaxy was safer for it. And humanity, the species that had climbed from primitive tools to galactic power in just a few thousand years, had carved out their place among the stars, not through dominance, not through fear, but through a simple message that every species now understood. Do not threaten what humans love, because humans will never stop coming for you.